My name is Tim Hogan. I was the communications director for Amy Klobuchar's presidential campaign. So, day in and day out, I think a big issue for us and for all the presidential campaigns when you have a field that is 20 plus is trying to find some unique way to break out of the mold. So, trying to find a way to take Senator Klobuchar's authentic voice, amplify that, and then draw more people in and try to meet people where they are. One thing that we did that I think was interesting and important in a race like this is when you have so many people, it is very much a mode of survive and advance, in particular because of the way that the debates were structured, where you had to meet certain thresholds for low dollar fundraising, which was focused primarily online for us, and to meet polling requirements. And as a result, you are focused on a momentum narrative sort of in conjunction with everything else that you're doing. So we would look for different variables that we could push out to people, whether it is we are seeing our crowd sizes go up. There's some value in not riding the polar coaster, but when you are in a field that large and a lot of people are in lower to mid single digits, you got to find a way to stick out. And if your numbers go up, you should sell that. You should be blasting your lists, asking them to donate. So one thing that we thought about on a day-to-day basis from a digital perspective that we haven't thought about on every other campaign is how do you show that your momentum is continuing, and that your efforts and what you're asking people to do to help you is making an impact and that they're moving the needle. I think there were a few key moments for us, one of which there seems to be consensus around was sort of a turning point for our campaign, which didn't start online, but ended up being a huge online moment, which was the New Hampshire debate. It was pretty clear to us in the first 30 minutes that we were going to have a standout performance. She for all of the debates, had been one of the leading voices explaining why her healthcare proposal she thought was better than Medicare for all, doing it in a very effective way. She was someone who, in this particular debate, made a contrast with Pete Buttigieg about the way he had been talking about impeachment in a way that she deemed non-serious, that very much elevated her voice. And then finally, the closing, she did a riff relating to when FDR passed away, and there was a funeral train that went from Warm Springs, Georgia, to Hyde Park, New York, and a reporter in Washington, D.C. at one of those stops met someone who was in mourning, was crying, and the reporter asks the person, "Did you know the president?" And the person responds, "No, but the president knew me."
And the guy says, "No, I didn't know the president, but he knew me."
What Amy did is take that riff in her closing and say what's missing in the White House right now is empathy. And that means that this president doesn't know you, but if you're struggling to pay the rent, if you're struggling to afford prescription drugs, I know you, and I will fight for you.
If you have trouble stretching your paycheck to pay for that rent, I know you, and I will fight for you. If you have trouble deciding if you're going to pay for your child care or your long-term care, I know you, and I will fight for you. If you have trouble figuring out if you're going to fill your refrigerator or fill your prescription drug, I know you, and I will fight for you.
That moment we saw immediately online sort of explode. There was a lot of organic engagement online with that. We had spin room commentators saying it was one of the best moments, not only of the debates, but of the campaign itself. And so we saw our views of that video hit 1 million very quickly in a way that we hadn't seen before. So we turned around very quickly to GPS Impact, our firm. They made it into a TV ad. They made it into a digital ad. We got that up. We boosted our spending on Facebook. We went very quickly blasting out emails. And I think there's a lesson there sort of that you want to test a lot. You know, you do your subject line testing, but sometimes there's a trade-off. You have to make a call. We just got to get this out the door, and we got to do this very quickly. And it's a volume game. One other internet moment I would say kind of stuck out as a fun moment is during a lot of the debates, Amy, as one of the few women remaining on the stage, sometimes would be caught in the crossfire of three of the male candidates, yelling and everything. And she's kind of sitting there doing this. And we saw a ton of organic engagement around that as well, and brought some new people into our campaign because, there are plenty of women who could relate to that moment and say, oh, I have been there. Our number one priority was, or to start at the very least, was growing our base. There were other candidates in this race who had either run for president the previous cycle, who had large email lists that were, ready to mobilize an online army, or they were household names like the vice president, or people who just had higher profiles. One of the decisions that we made early on is that we had to grow those lists, but our TIR firm, I think, was very smart in determining how we were going to do that, thinking about pre-qualifying who we were reaching out to, instead of just doing things to just build a list. There was plenty of opportunities day by day to blast out anti-Trump emails and get a swath of names. But what we did was sort of lean into the message of, join Amy, or here's Amy's particular message, even if it's tying it to some news of the day that Trump was doing. It sort of primed our lists to be people who were more interested in her than just, signing up and being angry about whatever the news of the day Trump was doing or was creating. And I think another thing that was important for us was to use our resources efficiently. We were one of the campaigns that built a very good digital infrastructure. We made those investments early on, and we realized that those were key. And I think that helped us grow and build those lists and bring in the resources that we need. And at the same time, though, I think we were frugal about a lot of spending, in particular, TV ad spending, and figuring out what is the trade-off between digital and TV, and how can you mix those two mediums together, which ones are more affordable and still getting you reach and high value. And that is one thing that I think, had we gone into Super Tuesday, would have been really interesting to see how our model had played out in terms of how we were weighing congressional districts, where the votes were, if we were doing a mix of TV and digital in those areas, or just one or the other. I think one was localizing impact with digital. So, in Iowa, we had a lot of endorsements. We had the most current and former legislative endorsements of any candidate in the field. But the question is, okay, you get those. How do you make those matter? How do you make those continue to matter? And so we cut digital ads with those representatives, Representative Ruth Ann Gaines, Senator Liz Mathis, who are well known in their communities, and we targeted those ads to people in those districts. And I think that was really important. We put those up on TV in those districts as well. Amy was sort of the person who gathered a lot of newspaper endorsements, and those, again, very valuable. But how do you stretch those? How do you make those more valuable? And so we would do site takeovers of those newspapers. We did the Union Leader in New Hampshire when we saw our momentum growing there, which was really important. I think sort of like a microcosm of the authenticity conversation, tactically, is we decided early on that hot dish was a thing, and we were going to make hot dish a thing. And so we sent out an email saying, donate $1 and we will give you Amy's taconite tater tot hot dish recipe. And the open rates on it were like through the roof. It was crazy. When we posted we then posted the recipe, tweeted it, posted it on Epicurious. Social media, if to this day, if you just go search her handle and hot dish, you will just see people tweeting at her, hey, I just made your hot dish. Like, this is delicious and amazing. And it is kind of this hilarious organizing tool that we saw. We had merch. We had a tea towel that was about hot dish. It was our top seller. We organized hot dish house parties. It was a huge thing for us. The New York Times wrote up an article about bringing hot dish culture to Iowa, which is a land of casserole, and hot dish and casserole are not the same thing. So it's very important. But their point was it is a comfort food, and it's just like a caucus because it brings everybody together, and you all celebrate. I think the lesson that I draw from all of that is like authenticity doesn't just mean turning on your camera and talking to it and it's like I'm authentic in this moment because it's just me unfiltered talking. It is figuring out what are those characteristics about your candidate that you want to introduce everyone else to. So how do we take the Minnesota-ness of Amy Klobuchar and how do we introduce it to other people? And one way we did that was with hot dish. So this is an interesting one, and I was on the other side of this before, and I end up believing the other side after we did it with some experimenting, and that is depending on who your candidate is and how they use social media themselves, letting the principal keep Twitter, have access to Twitter, and be able to post their own content. There is a hesitancy for staff to allow that to happen because you feel like you've lost control. The flip side of that is if you have a member of the Senate or elected official who is used to that, taking that away from them makes it feel like they've lost control. And so I think there's a balance there in terms of collaboration on social media where it's not just staff pushing out content. And I think what's important about it is we always talk about the retention of voice as how it relates to authenticity. Well, there is no better person to communicate their voice than the principal themselves. And you're never going to be able to replicate that. Even if you're taking their words off stump speech and just tweeting them out, it is not the same because it is not how they may use that particular medium. If she is sitting watching a Vikings game or a Twins game, we might not tweet about every single game, but if she's watching and sees a play that she thinks is really huge, she may tweet about it, and that happened, and that gets engagement. My biggest the lesson that I take away is a little bit going back to the question of momentum and sort of like looking for those metrics and how do you get your supporters excited about what's going on? How do you get reporters to notice that you are doing well? And then how do you capture sort of new folks' attention and then integrate them into a community of supporters? And I think the last part of that question was a very big learning experience for me because, I have not participated in many 25-way primaries. And when you do that, you sort of have a segmented audience of, you have the K-Hive, you have Warren supporters, you have diehard Sanders fans, you have Biden's folks. And those communities, can be rigid, but they can also be fluid. And how can you, communicate to Sanders supporters in a way that is amicable, that maybe doesn't gain their support, but that gains their respect and maybe helps you around the margins a little bit. And being respectful of other communities when a primary is so divided like that and being able to communicate with other members' supporters. And I feel like there were a lot of shows of solidarity in the field, whether it was, when Kamala was being attacked by Russian bots or the president or any other candidate who was running, sort of the other candidates coming to their side, and where you feel like it's always a competition. There are moments to show solidarity. And I think those moments online are also very powerful. One thing I wish we would have done more is very simple, is more behind the scenes videos. There were moments where she would just like take out her phone and we'd be driving in New Hampshire through a snowstorm or through Iowa, frequently in snowstorms, because a mantra for our campaign after the campaign launch in the blizzard was, Amy Klobuchar doesn't cancel events.
We don't let a little snow stop us.
Taking moments like that, we did a couple. I wish we would have done more. I think the effort to sort of make your candidate seem normal is really important. I think a lot of normal people think that these candidates are born on the Senate floor in a suit, and they don't know how to relate to that. So how are you able to show them things of them just being regular people. I think my advice would be build your infrastructure and do it right away, and do it with the understanding that content is not just a 30-second TV ad that you then put on Twitter or Facebook, and think through your staffing and what it means to be able to produce this type of content. And this is not a question just for candidates. I think this is a question for anybody who's interviewing on a campaign to figure out what the campaign's philosophy of how this is going to matter, like what that looks like. Because you have to get the leadership of the campaign and the candidate bought in on this mattering, and understanding that you are your own publishing empire. You should have a lot of different channels. You should know what different audiences are in different channels. You should know on Snapchat you're talking to younger voters. You should know on Facebook you're talking to older voters. You know on Twitter you're talking to reporters and influencers who can change the trajectory of how an article looks, or how beltway elites look at your campaign. You can't always create a moment, but you can prepare for it, and you should be ready to capitalize on it. And that means having an infrastructure that makes sense and that can execute. Yeah, it's a critical point. Is how do you meet people where they are when you can't get to their door? There's an offensive part of this question, but there's also a defensive part of this question I think doesn't get enough attention, and that is, what is voting going to look like in November, and what does that even that act even look like? And that is a huge question for digital teams ahead of election day. Your voter education programs may have to shift to educating people about vote by mail, depending on what our system looks like once November rolls around. That means getting people comfortable with that process. It may mean pushing more people to early vote, if that's possible, so that lines are not as crowded if people are afraid of crowds. What does your defense against a Russian disinformation campaign look like in an era where we are also battling a pandemic? I think from a messaging perspective, I would stress you have to be aggressive in not letting Trump rewrite history right now, in terms of your digital messaging. If this campaign is going to be about his response and a referendum on his handling of the pandemic, we can't let him take that time from early January to March and redefine what happened there and say, well, I grounded flights from China to the United States and I bought us some time, and so that's fine. And there's nothing else I could have done. There are so many things that he has botched in this response, and I'm heartened to see that the Biden campaign is doing a media blitz with him. They're doing live streams. They're taking press questions over Zoom. They're doing a lot of things to reach people where they are, which is on their couches at home. And I think that's a question we're going to have to continue to answer: is how do we shift our resources from here to there? One of my favorite moments, which was sort of seeing the campaign uh, fire on all cylinders, were the final days in New Hampshire, because of what we saw online, where we had a great debate performance. I feel like we took advantage of it the right way online. We had a good closing. We blasted that out. We got eyes on it. We got people talking about it, and seeing the growth of uh, sort of allies online. People were taking a look at her, and we saw engagement on all of our platforms sort of go through the roof. We saw some of our best days of online fundraising. We saw some of our best open rates. We saw great signups for recruitment for volunteers online, and then those people would show up, help us make phone calls, and get out the vote. There was a moment where Chris Jansing is interviewing people outside, and we always sort of ask ourselves the question, like, is this really breaking through? Like, all of this that we're doing, like, are people really hearing it? Is it sinking in? Do people actually feel this momentum? Is it just us? And there's this 3-year-old outside, and the dad is holding this kid, and Jansing asks like who are your parents going to vote for? Who should they vote for? And like very cute voice, he's like Amy Klobuchar. So like there is a point where it's like, okay, we broke through to the degree that like the 3-year-old is beginning to be able to pronounce Klobuchar, which is sort of a testament to everything working, right? And the online component of that is a huge component. I think sort of we had a good night. She came in third place. There was a surge, and the first thing she said, which again saw a ton of engagement online and was carried on a lot of networks, is "Hello, my name is Amy Klobuchar, and I'm going to defeat Donald Trump."
Hello, America. I'm Amy Klobuchar, and I will beat Donald Trump.
My advice would be for other campaigns, or what I remember from our campaign, were times when we sort of met the moment. For us, I think it was our campaign launch. She announced her candidacy in a blizzard. Those photos became iconic. They became an underpinning of some of our messaging in the campaign, that she was tough, that she had grit. Sort of like taking those moments and hammering them and making it part of what someone thinks about when they think about your candidate, I think is really important. And so meeting the moment is part of that, is taking where you are, the conditions that you have, being able to communicate your message. And I think that's critical for a lot of candidates right now, particularly those down ballot. I think about there is a candidate in Montana running for superintendent who has taken the time to read to on Facebook Live, read children's stories, and parents have sort of like sat their kids down in front of a screen as she reads them a story, and she's like, "Look, I'm giving you some time. I am allowing parents to like have their own free time while entertaining your kids." And I think that is just such like innovative way to meet the moment.